Alright, so first we're going to start out taking the cable out of the way, because if we don't take the throttle cable out of the way, you're going to end up breaking this little plastic coupler on the end of the cable. You're thinking that you're going to be able to work around it, so that's really going to be a problem. Keep all your parts in a decent order, and if you are working on a project that you've never done before and you say, wow, it looks like there's a lot of little pieces and parts in here, take a picture of it. I've done this 100 times already, you know, throughout my life, so this is not going to be anything really significant for me, but you know, take a picture so you know exactly where all the wires go, all the hoses go when you're doing this, and when you put it back together, you know that you got to put it back together right. Okay, and we'll continue on with this. We need to get the sockets in here so I don't have to keep walking back and forth. Do some 5/16. There, let's pull these little screws out. Don't lose them. And it's not a good idea to work over a test tank if you can help it. I'm doing it to save myself a little bit of time. So I've got those parts. Grab extension, another socket. Up. So there's stuff around it that I can get at. It's my ground cable. A lot of people put like these nuts and washers up here on top of the flywheel. I'm not against it if you're very careful, because what will end up happening in the end though is if you ain't 100% sure that everything is out of here, when you start this motor up here, things are going to start flying out. And I leave it up to you, but when things start flying away, you're going to have to find a way to replace those somehow. So we're going to take the starter solenoid off. I've already disconnected the battery, as you saw. There is a 3/8 inch bolt back here that loosens up the clamp that holds this starter relay on. So we want to loosen that clamp up just a little bit so we can pop this guy loose. It's another reason why we disconnected the negative side of the battery so we don't accidentally cause sparks. And then there's this bolt down here at the bottom. This bolt has to come off because this is part of this bracket to hold it to the main block. So that bolt, this one right here, we need both those, and there's one up here in front. All three of those are going to need to come off. And so for that, it's very helpful to have yourself a 7/16 swivel. Oops, that's my 3/8. 7/16 swivel, and I like to use this little tool right here. Nut driver handle. So you can get in there, give it a spin at an angle. Loosen this. There we go there. And loosen this guy up a little bit. Now I don't need my ratchet. I'll put those two tools right there. One nut. those are what holds the starter on. So we'll set those out right there. Now the starter should be pretty loose and ready to come out. Has to come forward. There's a stud up here in front. Wiggle it around. Gently set it down to the side so it doesn't torque on the wires. Grab your 1/2-inch end wrench. Now we get at this bolt that we couldn't get at because the starter was in the way before. Got one on the opposite side. And then we have this little shaft right here that's in the way. So we need to pop him loose. He just snaps out of the plastic coupler. Crack the throttle with your hand a little bit. And then you can spin the nuts loose. Just pull these hoses off before we get the nut completely off. And when I pull that bottom hose on here, if you come over here and take a look, you'll see this bottom hose right here. That's in the bottom of the float bowl. That works in conjunction with my primer system right here that I was pulling on before. You see this right here? This plugs onto this. That's my primer, so I pull it out. A little bit of fuel shoots into my carburetor to help start the engine. A little bit of raw gas. Well, when I pull this hose off here, I'm going to grab this rag, I'm going to stuff it underneath it so this rag will catch the raw gas is going to come out. If I can get it under there, stuffed it up thick. There we go. Now I'm going to pull this hose off because the float bowl is full of gas right now. Just going to grab my screwdriver so I can push that hose. There. You see the gas flowing out of it? So I'm all going to get caught by that rag so we don't accidentally have some sort of fire here. And as we're doing that, we're going to keep working on pulling the carburetor off. These nuts on here, you'll have to work back and forth and pull the carburetor as you're working back and forth because they won't fit out, slide out to the end and off unless the carburetor moves out just a little bit. So we're working back and forth. Set that right there. Alright, I got both nuts off the carburetor. You should be able to slide the carburetor out now. Underneath the carburetor is another hose for filling the carburetor up from the fuel pump. Slide him off. A little twisting action should get him off. There we go. Now our carburetor's off. Now if you remember, a few minutes ago, we had a problem with the engine not wanting to idle. So, come over here so you can watch me disassemble this. Grab our screwdriver. Pull the screws out. There's my float bowl. This on the float bowl right here is a little tag. It's just telling you the part number of the carburetor. That's from the factory. Most carburetors probably still won't have that on there anymore. Okay, so here's my carburetor. Fuel inside the carburetor, let's find a decent pointer. fills the float bowl up. It drops around this needle and seat. So the fuel comes in through the bottom of the carburetor, up through this hole, right there, cuts across, drops down the needle and seat, fills the float bowl up, and this floats on the gasoline, and when the float comes up about that high, it shuts the needle and seat. So the fuel can't get into the bowl anymore. We use some of the gas out, it drops back down and fills the bowl back up, and the flow comes up and it shuts off again. That's how this system works. That's pretty much how any float type carburetor works. Now, earlier we had no working with the idle circuit wasn't working. Here's my idle mixture screw right there. So if I turn it in, you can see 1/2 a turn, one full turn, turn and a half. It was set at about 1 3/4. That should have been plenty enough gas to get into there. This little screw right here is nothing more than a needle. I'll back it out so you can see it. That regulates how much gas is going to get into the intake manifold of the carburetor. You can see that there's a screw on that, a spring on that. It's threaded, and this is a tapered needle right here. So that tapered needle fits into that hole in there. And allows it to let more or less gas come through that big hole right there. You're just seeing this round drilled hole. It allows more or less gas through that hole. That is my idle discharge port, my idle port. We need to make sure that the fuel circuit is clean from my idle jet, my idle air jet. I'll back that out, make sure that circuit's clean. Not that the idle jet was giving us grief. There's my idle jet. There is a number stamped on the end of it. I can't read it right now, but there is a specific size. I'm guessing it's a 30 without my magnifying glass. Take the gasket out, make sure the gasket is in good shape. Still dealing with the idle circuit, so we spray a little carb spray through here. And you can watch it come out. Pretty dark. Got the carburetor upside down right here. That might make it a little easier to see. Plus I don't have much pressure behind the... Okay. So you're able to see it come through there, so it's flowing. We have some off idle ports. Let me grab my flashlight so you can see those. Okay, so we got the big port right there, that's my idle port. Then we have some off idle ports. Those are those 3 guys right there. So when the carburetor is idling, the throttle plate is completely shut. And we start giving it some throttle. And then it starts coming through those holes right there, and give some more throttle. It'll start coming through this big brass tube right back there with the drilled holes in it. That's my high-speed discharge nozzle, or main nozzle some people call it. Okay. The fuel gets from the float bowl around here. It travels down this little hole right here, cuts across to this right there. Grab that flashlight so you can see it. So it cuts across there. If you look down inside, you can see just a little bit of light inside of the tube. That's my nozzle well. Fuel comes up that for both my high speed and for my idle circuit. This is my idle nozzle right here. This is where all the fuel from my idle circuit, this little skinny tube, makes it all the way up to the top of the carburetor and then down my idle port and my off idle discharge ports that are hiding back here. And if you look closely at what we have here, what do we see? Got a piece of fuzz in there. That's the whole reason right there as to why this engine was not idling. We got a piece of fuzz in there. If I were to go and put this thing all the way back together right now, and I just pull that piece of fuzz out, show you what it was. Right there. Right now, the engine will probably idle. However, if you're going to charge a customer for taking apart his carburetor and cleaning it, we can't stop right here, because there might have been some more fuzz farther up in the system. So we're going to go through and we're going to properly clean the carburetor while we're at it. Pull this pin out, it's a plastic pin, make sure you don't lose it. We have the float and we have a needle. Okay, this is a Viton tip needle, it's V-I-T-O-N. It's not rubber, but you know, we can call it rubber. So it's a rubber tip needle, and that helps. Instead of the old days, it used to be solid steel, and the solid steel will make a groove in it. This one right here, we're looking for a smooth tip, and a smooth tip on this from one here. Sometimes you'll get a little groove around these because they've been sitting too long, and then it doesn't seat very well and your engine's going to flood, which means you're going to get too much gas all the time. Nothing's going to shut the gas off. So if you're going to put a carb kit in, those parts come with the carb kit, and also we're inspecting it for that. We're going to inspect these gaskets right here. We look closely at the gaskets, and if you look, these bowls don't have it. Many carburetors from BRP do. They'll look for like a little groove around this whole thing. We want to make sure that indentation is there. On this center round one, you can see it. Just barely, but it's there. There is like a little groove indentation around this whole thing. And we want to make sure that that is there, that you see the indentation. It means that the float bowl and the body of the carburetor are touching properly. There's enough pressure on them. There's enough pressure on this to hold that gasket tight in the middle. If this gasket is missing, or if it's not sealing properly, the engine is going to run lean on top end and potentially burn the engine down, causing the piston to get a hole melted in it or score a cylinder, something like that. So we want to make sure that gasket is definitely there.